There are nights when the desert speaks in a language older than words, when the wind carries secrets across the sage, and the stars burn so bright they seem to pierce the veil between worlds. Dr. Marcus Webb had learned to listen to those nights during his 5 years of exile in the Texas borderlands, though he'd stopped believing they had anything meaningful to say. Until the night the sky fell, and with it, everything he thought he knew about the universe, about God, and about the purpose written into human DNA like a promise waiting to be read. Marcus Webb was 53 years old when his old life ended and his new one began, though he didn't recognize the transformation until it was already complete. He lived in a weathered wooden house 23 miles outside Tolingua, Texas, where the Chihuahuan Desert stretched endless and unforgiving under skies so vast they made a man feel simultaneously insignificant and eternal. The house had been a hunting cabin once, expanded over decades by various owners into a rambling structure of cedar and stone, its back rooms converted into what Marcus called his workshop, but what had once been his pride, a fully equipped surgical suite, complete with operating table, anesthesia equipment, and cabinets stocked with instruments that gleamed like silver prayers under fluorescent light. He'd been a surgeon once, a good one, some said brilliant, at Methodist Hospital in Houston, specializing in thoracic procedures, his hands steady enough to repair hearts while they beat, his mind sharp enough to make split-second decisions that meant the difference between life and death. But brilliance and steadiness couldn't save him from the inevitable trajectory of a life built on achievement rather than meaning. His marriage had dissolved after 22 years, Sarah taking their daughter Emma to Seattle, leaving Marcus alone in a house filled with awards and empty rooms. He'd thrown himself deeper into work, taking on more surgeries, more complex cases, until the morning he'd walked into OR3 and frozen, his hands trembling over an open chest cavity, a 58-year-old woman's life dependent on fingers that suddenly remembered they belonged to a human being, not a machine. The panic attack lasted 7 minutes. The hospital administration's response lasted 3 weeks, culminating in a voluntary early retirement at 48, his reputation intact, but his confidence shattered. He'd bought the Tolingua property with cash, packed his medical equipment, unable to part with the tools that had defined him, and driven west until the city disappeared in his rearview mirror and the desert opened its arms like a harsh but honest lover. 5 years he'd lived here now, fixing ranch hands' injuries for cash under the table, occasionally driving the 70 miles to Alpine when supplies ran low or loneliness became unbearable. He'd grown lean and weathered, his dark hair shot through with silver, his blue eyes acquiring the permanent squint of someone who stared too long at horizons. He read extensively, philosophy, theology, physics, searching for answers to questions he couldn't quite articulate. Why had his hands betrayed him? What was the point of skill without purpose? Was there a God watching his exile, or was the universe merely indifferent matter, arranging itself in patterns that occasionally produced consciousness capable of contemplating its own meaninglessness? The desert provided no answers, only space. Space to think, to remember, to regret. And on certain nights, when the wind died and the silence became absolute, space to hear something that might have been his soul whispering that this isolation, this stripping away of identity and achievement, was preparation for something he couldn't yet see. October 23rd began like any other day in his calendar of identical days. Marcus rose at dawn, brewed coffee strong enough to strip paint, and sat on the porch, watching the sun ignite the desert in shades of copper and gold. He spent the morning reading, a book on quantum mechanics attempting to reconcile physics with spirituality, and the afternoon working on the old Ford pickup that served as his only connection to civilization beyond his property line. By evening, he'd grilled a steak over mesquite coals, eaten alone at the wooden table while NPR crackled from the ancient radio, and settled into his chair with a glass of bourbon and the stars for company. The meteor appeared at 9:17 p.m., though he wouldn't know the exact time until later, when he replayed the moment obsessively, searching for signs he'd missed. It wasn't the typical shooting star, a brief streak of light across the velvet black, but a sustained burn bright as Venus, carving a trajectory from northeast to southwest, trailing sparks that seemed to pulse with unnatural regularity. Marcus stood, bourbon forgotten, watching as the object descended not in the distant anonymity of space but close, terrifyingly close, its angle suggesting impact somewhere within a few miles of his location. The sound came seconds later, not the expected thunder crack of meteor strike but something stranger, a harmonic hum that vibrated in his chest cavity, making his teeth ache and his heart stutter in its rhythm. Then silence, absolute and oppressive, as if the desert held its breath. No coyotes howling, no insects chirping, no wind rustling the creosote bushes, just Marcus's ragged breathing and the hammering of his pulse in his ears. Every instinct screamed at him to stay put, lock the doors, wait for dawn to investigate, if investigation was even necessary. It was probably nothing, some atmospheric phenomenon he didn't understand, or debris from a satellite burning up in the atmosphere. But another part of him, the part that had driven him to medicine in the first place, the healer's compulsion to respond to suffering, grabbed the maglite from the porch, climbed into the Ford, and followed his intuition northwest, where the light had seemed to fall. The ranch road was more suggestion than fact, 2 ruts through sand and rock that required 4-wheel drive and faith in roughly equal measure. Marcus navigated by moonlight and memory, the truck bouncing through arroyos and over rises until he crested a low hill and saw it, a faint glow emanating from a depression about 300 yards ahead, pulsing with that same rhythmic quality he'd observed in the descent. He killed the engine, grabbed his medical bag from behind the seat, an old habit, carrying it everywhere, and approached on foot, the maglight's beam cutting through darkness thick as velvet. The craft, and there was no other word for it despite his mind's desperate attempt to categorize it as weather balloon or experimental drone, rested in a shallow crater, partially embedded in sand and stone. It was perhaps 15 feet in diameter, shaped like a teardrop or seed, its surface a dark metallic gray that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. No seams were visible, no rivets or welds, just smooth continuity that suggested manufacture beyond human capability. The glow emanated from a rupture in the lower quadrant, viscous silver fluid leaking into the sand, steaming in the cool desert air, and near the rupture, partially obscured by shadow, a figure lay motionless. Marcus's breath caught. Every childhood nightmare of alien invasion, every Hollywood image of grey humanoids with black eyes flashed through his mind, competing with his medical training's imperative. Someone, something, was injured and needed help. He moved closer, flashlight beam trembling slightly, and got his first clear look at the being that would upend everything he thought he understood about reality. It was humanoid, in the loosest sense, bilateral symmetry, 4 limbs, a head roughly where a head should be, but there the resemblance to Homo sapiens ended. The being stood perhaps 6.5 feet tall, its frame slender but suggesting dense musculature, covered in what appeared to be skin, but with a faint iridescent quality, like oil on water, shifting through subtle hues of silver, blue and violet as Marcus's light played across it. The head was elongated slightly, the cranium larger in proportion than human, with features that were almost familiar but not quite, eyes set wide, closed now, too large and angled upward at the outer corners, no visible nose, just slight indentations, a mouth that was barely a slit. No ears that Marcus could see, though there were slight protrusions where ears might be. The hands, 3 fingers and what might have been an opposable thumb, each digit longer than human normal, ending in what looked like flat pads rather than nails. And it was injured, badly. The silver fluid leaking from the craft also leaked from a wound in the being's left side, just below what might have been ribs, the torn tissue revealing underlying structures that glowed faintly with bioluminescence, as if its biology ran on light rather than chemical processes. The breathing, if it was breathing, came shallow and irregular, the chest rising and falling with obvious difficulty. Marcus knelt in the sand, his medical training overriding shock and fear. Injured patient, unknown physiology, active bleeding, respiratory distress, triage, assessment, action. His hands, the same hands that had betrayed him in Houston, moved with automatic precision, checking for pulse. He found it, or something like it, a thrumming beneath the skin of the neck that was too rapid, too thready. Body temperature elevated, the skin hot to touch but not feverish in the human sense, more like touching warm glass. The wound itself was deep, penetrating what he guessed was the equivalent of the abdominal cavity, though whether anything vital had been compromised was pure speculation. He couldn't leave it here. Whatever it was, whoever it was, the injury would prove fatal without intervention. The nearest hospital was Alpine, 70 miles away, and what would he say? I found an alien, please don't arrest me or dissect it. No. If this being had any chance of survival, it would be in Marcus's hands. In the surgical suite he'd maintained out of pride and nostalgia, and the desperate hope that his skills might someday matter again. The being was surprisingly light, perhaps 120 pounds despite its height, as if its bones were hollow like a bird's or made of material less dense than human calcium. Marcus carried it to the truck, laid it across the back seat with as much care as he'd give any trauma patient, and drove back to the house with his heart hammering and his mind racing through anatomical possibilities and ethical impossibilities in equal measure. The surgical suite occupied what had been the cabin's largest back room, 15 by 20 feet of sterile tile and stainless steel, lit by overhead surgical lamps that Marcus now activated with shaking hands. He transferred the being to the operating table, its form incongruous against the familiar medical equipment, as if two realities were bleeding into each other. The mundane world of human medicine and something vast and incomprehensible that defied categorization. Assessment first. Marcus worked methodically, cutting away the thin membrane that covered the being's torso like a second skin, not clothing, but something integrated with the body, self-repairing at the edges where his scissors cut. Beneath, the wound was worse than he'd feared, a jagged tear approximately 4 inches long, penetrating deep into the body cavity, that silver fluid, blood, lymph, something else entirely, pooling around organs that were both familiar and utterly alien in their arrangement. He could identify structures that might correspond to lungs, though there were 3 of them, arranged in a triangular pattern. Something that pulsed rhythmically might be a heart, though it was located more centrally than in humans, visible through translucent tissue that glowed softly with each contraction. Other structures defied identification entirely, crystalline nodes arranged along what might be a spine, networks of filaments that looked more like fiber optic cables than nerves, organs whose purpose he couldn't begin to guess. The primary challenge was the bleeding. Marcus couldn't use standard cauterization. He had no idea how this tissue would respond to heat, and sutures seemed inadequate for material that wasn't quite flesh. He improvised, using surgical adhesive designed for emergency field medicine, applying it carefully to the wound edges, watching in amazement as the being's tissue seemed to respond to the adhesive, bonding with it and then incorporating it, the boundary between synthetic and organic blurring as he watched. The work took 3 hours. Marcus lost himself in it, the way he used to lose himself in surgeries at Methodist, the outside world fading until nothing existed except the task at hand, the problem to solve, the life to save. His hands were steady, his mind was clear. For the first time in 5 years he felt competent, purposeful, needed. When he finally stepped back, satisfied that the immediate crisis had passed, the being's breathing had stabilized, the bleeding stopped, the wound sealed with a combination of adhesive, his limited understanding of the physiology, and what he suspected was the being's own regenerative capabilities taking over. He cleaned up, properly disposing of the contaminated materials, and then sat in the chair beside the operating table, exhausted, watching his patient's chest rise and fall with increasing regularity. The adrenaline was wearing off, replaced by the full weight of what he'd done, what he was harboring in his home. An extraterrestrial being, proof of life beyond Earth, evidence that would rewrite human history, challenge every religious doctrine, vindicate or destroy various scientific theories. And he'd hidden it in his desert surgical suite like a rancher, hiding an injured stray. What now? Wait, he supposed, see if the being survived. And if it did, then what? He dozed fitfully in the chair, jerking awake periodically to check vitals he barely understood, until sometime near dawn when he opened his eyes to find the being watching him. The eyes were open, large, almond-shaped, the color shifting through gradients of amber to violet, with pupils that contracted to vertical slits in the dim light. There was intelligence in that gaze, profound and assessing, studying Marcus with the same intensity he'd directed at it during surgery. For a long moment neither moved, doctor and patient locked in mutual evaluation, the weight of the impossible settling between them, like a third presence in the room. Then, without the being's mouth moving, without any sound at all, Marcus heard or felt or understood, words forming in his consciousness. You saved me. Why? The question arrived not as language but as pure meaning, bypassing his ears entirely and manifesting directly in his mind. Marcus's heart stuttered, his rational brain screaming hallucination even as he knew, with absolute certainty, that this was real. Telepathy, direct consciousness to consciousness communication. He answered aloud, his voice rough from disuse and emotion. Because you were dying, because I'm a doctor, because... He trailed off, unable to articulate the deeper truth, that he'd been waiting 5 years for something to give his skills meaning again, and the universe had answered by literally dropping it from the sky. Another wave of meaning. You fear me, yet you helped. This is unexpected. Humans usually choose fear over compassion when confronted with the unknown. "Are you going to hurt me?" Marcus asked, realizing as he spoke how absurd the question was. The being was injured, weakened, entirely at his mercy. But the fear was real, primal, the product of every cultural narrative about hostile alien invaders. "No, I mean you no harm. My species, we do not harm. We observe, we guide, we wait for readiness." A pause, and Marcus felt something like pain in the telepathic connection, not physical, but emotional. The crash was accident. Navigation systems damaged by passage through your asteroid belt. I would have died if you had not intervened. This debt is significant. "What's your name?" Marcus asked, then felt foolish. Did this being even have names as humans understood them? The response came as a complex harmonic, a vibration that contained layers of meaning Marcus's mind couldn't fully unpack. But within it, he sensed something he could approximate. "You may call me Aerith. It is close enough to my designation in your linguistic framework." "Aerith," Marcus repeated. "I'm Marcus, Dr. Marcus Webb." He hesitated, then asked the question that had been building since he'd found the crash site. "Where are you from? Why are you here?" "I am from a world you have no name for, orbiting a star your scientists catalogue as HD 10180. My people have observed your species for, in your time measurement, 12,000 years. We watch, we wait, we hope." "Hope for what?" "For you to remember what you have forgotten, for you to awaken from the dream you call reality, for you to recognize the truth that burns in your DNA like code waiting to be read." Marcus felt his pulse accelerate. "What truth? What are you talking about?" But Aerith's eyes were closing again, exhaustion overtaking the being despite the intensity of the exchange. "Rest, heal. I will tell you everything. The truth behind 3i Atlas, the purpose of human existence. The reason your prophet spoke of rapture and return. But first, rest. We both need rest." The telepathic presence withdrew, leaving Marcus alone with the echoing weight of those words. 3i Atlas, the comet currently making headlines as it approached the inner solar system. Prophets, rapture, return. His hands were shaking again, but not from panic, from anticipation. From the terrible, wonderful understanding that his life had just pivoted on an axis he hadn't known existed, and nothing would ever be the same. Marcus moved through the following day in a daze, mechanically preparing food he barely tasted, checking on Aerith every hour, watching the being's wound heal with impossible speed, the tissue knitting itself back together using principles that made his medical training feel like primitive fumbling. By evening, Aerith was sitting upright on the operating table, moving slowly but with increasing strength, those large eyes following Marcus around the room with an expression that might have been curiosity or amusement or something human categories couldn't capture. When darkness fell and Marcus settled into the chair with coffee and questions bubbling in his throat like trapped air, Aerith spoke, or rather, projected, again. "You want to understand. This is good. Understanding is the first step toward remembering." "Remembering what?" Marcus asked. "Who you are, who you have always been, what you were before the separation occurred." "What separation?" And so Aerith began to teach, and Marcus began to learn truths that rewrote the foundation of everything he'd believed about human history, spirituality, and destiny. "Your species," Aerith conveyed, "was not created fallen. You were not born into sin requiring salvation from external deity. This is the first lie, the original misunderstanding that has poisoned your development for millennia. You were created divine, consciousness incarnated into physical form for the purpose of experiencing limitation, so that the infinite could know itself through the finite. You are God experiencing being human, not humans trying to reach God." Marcus's theological understanding, cobbled together from childhood Sundays at the Baptist church and decades of skeptical questioning, strained under the implications. That's heresy, or New Age nonsense, or it is truth that your religious institutions cannot accept because it would dissolve their power structures. Listen, in the beginning, there was only consciousness, infinite, eternal, undifferentiated. What you call God, what we call the source, what quantum physicists are beginning to recognize as the quantum field of infinite possibility. This consciousness desired to know itself, to experience, to create. So it divided itself, not through separation, but through focus, like light through a prism creating rainbow. Each color still light, but distinct. Each soul still divine, but individuated. Your planet was chosen as schoolhouse, Earth as laboratory for accelerated consciousness evolution. Dense matter, linear time, the veil of forgetting, all designed to create the perfect conditions for growth through challenge. You incarnated here voluntarily, repeatedly, each lifetime adding experience, learning lessons of love and power and creation. And for eons, despite the density you remembered, you built civilizations in harmony with cosmic law. You communicated with your star families. You understood death as transition, not ending. Then came the separation. Approximately 6,000 years ago by your calendar, a distortion entered human consciousness, what your religious texts call the fall, but which was not punishment, but forgetting. Beings of service to self-orientation, what you might call demonic, though they are merely consciousness choosing separation over unity, introduced teachings of unworthiness, sin, and fear-based control. They convinced you that you were broken, fallen, in need of external salvation. They established religions and governments and economic systems, all designed to keep you locked in amnesia, forgetting your divine nature, dependent on hierarchies and authorities, instead of your own direct connection to source. Marcus's coffee had gone cold in his hands. His mind reeled, trying to reconcile this narrative with everything he'd been taught, everything he'd believed or rejected. But what about Jesus? He asked. If what you're saying is true, then Jesus was just, what, a man, a myth? Jesus, Erith conveyed with a wave of something like reverence Marcus could feel through the telepathic link, was real. More real than your historians understand. But he was not what your churches claim. He was not the only Son of God. You are all sons and daughters of the divine. He was not a blood sacrifice to appease an angry father. That teaching is perhaps the cruelest distortion ever introduced to human consciousness. Jesus was an ascended master, a consciousness that had evolved beyond the need for physical incarnation, but chose to embody one final time as demonstration. He came to show you what humans could become when they remembered their divinity, healing through consciousness, manifesting matter through intention, transcending death through understanding that consciousness is eternal. His message was simple. The kingdom of heaven is within you. You are the light of the world. These things you do and greater things you shall do. He was trying to wake you up, to remind you of your power, your unity with the Father, meaning source consciousness, not an external judge. But his teachings were hijacked. The message of personal empowerment became the doctrine of subservience. The demonstration of human potential became worship of an unreachable ideal. And the greatest magic trick in history was performed. They convinced you that the very things Jesus said you could do, heal, manifest, transcend death, were unique to him, impossible for you. They made you bow to the messenger instead of embodying the message. The room felt too small suddenly, the walls pressing in as centuries of cultural conditioning collided with ideas that simultaneously felt blasphemous and profoundly true. Marcus stood, pacing, running hands through his hair. So you're saying Christianity is false? That billions of people are worshipping a lie? No. I am saying Christianity contains truth buried under layers of institutional corruption and human misunderstanding. The heart of Christ's message, love, unity, transcendence, is true. But the framework built around it, original sin, vicarious atonement, fear of hell, need for intermediaries, serves control, not liberation. Your churches have become the very money changers Jesus confronted, spiritual gatekeepers, charging admission to a kingdom that was always freely accessible within. But, and here, Ereth's transmission carried something like hope. The time of remembering is at hand. The awakening Jesus prophesied, what your texts call the second coming, is not about a man returning on clouds. It is about Christ consciousness, unity consciousness, divine remembering, returning to collective human awareness. It is already beginning. You call it the Great Awakening. We call it the harvest. The harvest, Marcus's voice was barely a whisper. The rapture, the ascension, the transformation your prophets saw, but could not fully explain because they lacked the scientific framework to understand what was actually being shown to them. This is why I am here, Marcus. This is why the crash was not accident, but synchronicity. You were meant to help me. I was meant to teach you. And you were meant to become carrier of this message. I don't understand. What does this have to do with the comet, with Three-Eye Atlas? Ereth's eyes seemed to intensify, the pupils dilating, and Marcus felt the being's full attention focus on him like a beam of concentrated light. Tomorrow, rest now. Your mind needs time to integrate these concepts, but tomorrow I will tell you about the comet, about what it carries, about why your governments monitor it with terror and hope in equal measure, about the frequency shift that is coming, and why some humans will transition while others will not. Tomorrow, you will learn the truth that has been hidden since before your recorded history began. Marcus slept fitfully, dreams filled with images he couldn't retain upon waking, churches crumbling and reforming as temples of light, DNA helixes unzipping to reveal written languages between the bases, his own hands glowing as they performed surgery on patients made of pure consciousness. He woke before dawn, brewed coffee with hands that trembled slightly, and found Aerith standing in the main room of the house, looking out the window at the desert sunrise with an expression that might have been longing. Beautiful, the being projected. We do not have deserts on my world. We do not have this particular quality of light. I will miss it when I return home. You're leaving? Marcus felt a sudden, irrational panic at the thought. Eventually, when the repair to my vessel is complete. But not yet. First, I must fulfill my purpose, and you must understand yours. They spent the morning talking, or rather, Aerith projecting and Marcus absorbing, asking questions, his scientific mind simultaneously skeptical and captivated. Aerith explained the structure of the multiverse, dimensions stacked like frequencies on a radio dial, each one as real as the others, but vibrating at different rates. Earth existed in what Aerith called the third density, physical matter, linear time, duality consciousness. Most of humanity operated here, perceiving only the narrow band of electromagnetic spectrum their eyes could process, mistaking this limitation for complete reality. But other densities existed above and below. Fourth density was where consciousness began operating in time more fluidly, where telepathy became natural, where the separation between self and other thinned. Fifth density was where Aerith's people existed primarily, form still present but malleable, time non-linear, unity consciousness, the default state. Beyond that were densities Marcus's mind couldn't grasp, each one closer to the ultimate state of pure consciousness, of reunion with Source. Earth is transitioning, Aerith explained. The planet herself is shifting frequency from third to fourth density. This happens in cycles, approximately every 26,000 years by your measurement, though the exact timing varies. The last transition occurred during what you call the fall of Atlantis, when humanity's consciousness had reached a peak but then chose service to self over service to others, resulting in catastrophic collapse. The survivors were forced to start again, and the amnesia became more complete. Now the cycle has completed. The transition is beginning again, but this time the outcome is different. This time enough humans have awakened to compassion, to unity, to love, that critical mass for positive transition has been achieved. Not all will make it, cannot make it, because their consciousness frequency is still locked in fear, division, materialism, but enough will, enough to tip the balance. The rapture, Marcus said, understanding blooming like dawn. That's what this is. The righteous being taken up, the wicked left behind. Yes and no. The framework is correct, but the interpretation is flawed. It is not about worthiness in moral terms, not about who believed the right doctrines or attended the right churches. It is about frequency, about consciousness vibration. Those who have cultivated love, compassion, service, openness, they vibrate at a rate compatible with fourth density. When the shift comes, they will transition naturally, their bodies transforming from carbon-based to crystalline-based biology, able to perceive and inhabit the new frequencies. Those still locked in fear, hatred, control, materialism, their frequencies cannot make the jump, not because they are being punished, but because it is simply physics. A radio tuned to AM cannot receive FM signals. They will remain in third density, likely on a different timeline, a different version of Earth, where they will continue learning the lessons they need until they too are ready for transition. No one is abandoned. Everyone gets as many chances as they need. But the choice, conscious or unconscious, determines the path. Marcus's mind raced. But what about the comet? What does Three-Eye Atlas have to do with all this? And here Aerith's presence in his mind became grave, weighted with significance that made the air in the room feel charged. Three-Eye Atlas is not a comet, or rather it is a comet, but it is more than that. It is an ark, a vessel, a delivery system constructed by the Council of Elders, beings from across the galaxy who oversee these planetary transitions, ensuring they proceed according to cosmic law. Inside the object you call a comet is technology, crystalline in nature, designed to emit a specific frequency when it reaches perihelion, when it comes closest to your sun. This frequency will act as catalyst. It will activate dormant DNA sequences in human genetics, sequences that have always been there but have been suppressed by your environment, by your diet, by intentional manipulation from those who wish to keep you controlled. When activated, these sequences will allow human consciousness to naturally shift, to expand, to remember. For those ready, it will be like waking from a dream, like suddenly seeing in color after a lifetime of black and white. For those not ready, it will be overwhelming, potentially psychologically destabilizing. Your governments know this. They have been monitoring 3I Atlas since its trajectory brought it into your solar system. They have analyzed its composition and found anomalies they cannot explain. They have detected the frequencies it emits and measured effects on test subjects. They know what is coming, but they cannot tell the public without causing the very panic that would make the transition harder. So they say nothing, or they say it is merely a comet, interesting but harmless. The date of closest approach is December 17th, just over 7 weeks from now. On that night, the frequency will reach maximum intensity, and the harvest will begin. Marcus felt his legs weaken. He sat heavily in the chair, head in hands, trying to process the implications. If this was true, and every fiber of his being was screaming that it was, despite the impossibility, then humanity stood on the edge of the greatest transformation in its history. The second coming wasn't a man in the clouds, but a frequency shift catalyzed by technology hidden inside a comet. The rapture was a scientific process overlaid with spiritual significance, and he, Marcus Webb, broken surgeon hiding in the Texas desert, had been given this knowledge by an injured alien who claimed it was no accident. "Why me?" he asked aloud. "Why tell me this? I'm nobody. I have no platform, no influence. I'm a failed doctor living in exile." "You are exactly who needs to know," Ereth projected gently. "You think in exile you are purposeless, but you chose this desert for the same reason prophets always choose deserts, to strip away the false self, to remember who you are beneath the titles and achievements. You saved my life not because you are a doctor, but because you are compassionate. This makes you qualified, and you will not remain nobody. When I leave, you will return to your world changed. You will speak, and those ready to hear will find you. You will heal, and those who need healing will come. You do not need platforms or influence. You need only authenticity. The rest will happen as it is meant to." On the third day, Ereth was strong enough to walk outside, and together they went into the desert, Marcus guiding the being away from the house in case satellites or aircraft might spot something anomalous. They sat on a rock outcropping overlooking a valley where the morning light painted the landscape in shades of rust and gold, and Ereth spoke of the church, both the beautiful truth at its heart and the terrible distortions that had corrupted it. Understand, the impulse to gather, to worship, to seek the divine collectively is beautiful and natural. When humans gather in love, in genuine desire for connection with Source and each other, they create powerful fields of consciousness. Your cathedrals and temples, when filled with authentic prayer and devotion, become portals, places where the veil between densities thins, where healing and revelation can occur more easily. But institutions over time become corrupted by human ego and the desire for power. Your churches, especially in the West, have become businesses selling salvation, political entities wielding influence, social clubs maintaining hierarchies. They preach dependence on buildings, on clergy, on rituals, on doctrines, when Jesus preached empowerment. They create fear of hell to control behavior when the only hell is separation from love, and it is self-created. They demand tithes while accumulating wealth when Jesus walked with the poor and taught sharing. Most damaging, they have made spirituality external. They teach that God exists outside you, that holiness requires intermediaries, that your direct experience of the divine is suspect unless validated by their authority. This is the ultimate blasphemy, not against God, but against your own nature. You are temples. You are the body of Christ, meaning you are embodied consciousness. No one stands between you and Source. No one. Marcus thought of his childhood church, the well-meaning pastor who taught him to fear God's judgment while preaching God's love. The cognitive dissonance that had driven him to quietly abandon faith in college. "So what do you do?" he asked. "How do you fix something so entrenched, so massive?" You do not fix institutions from within. They will resist transformation because transformation threatens their existence. No, you create new ways. You gather in homes, in nature, in circles where hierarchy is dissolved and each person recognized as equally divine. You teach direct experience over doctrine, inner authority over external authority. personal revelation over religious dogma. You become the church you wish to see, not a building or organization, but a living community of awakened souls. And many are already doing this. Your great awakening is happening in living rooms and online forums, in meditation groups and small gatherings of seekers. The institutional churches are shrinking, especially among the young who intuitively sense the disconnect between what is taught and what is true. This is as it should be. The old structures must crumble so new ones can grow, not to replace them with another hierarchy, but to establish networks of equals, collaborating in love rather than competing for power. But what about people who need their church? Marcus asked, thinking of his mother, who'd found comfort in services after his father died. For some, it's community, support, meaning. Then let them have it, without judgment. Not all are ready for the same level of awakening. Some need the structure, the ritual, the community that traditional church provides. This is fine. The only problem is when churches claim exclusivity, when they insist their way is the only way, when they condemn or dismiss other paths as false or demonic. Truth is faceted. Many paths lead to the same summit. Christianity is one valid path, when practiced as Jesus taught it, emphasizing love and unity and direct experience of the divine. But it is not the only path, and the insistence that it is has caused untold suffering. They sat in silence for a while, watching a hawk circle on thermals, its shadow skating across the desert floor. Then Marcus asked the question that had been building since their first conversation. What happens to me after December 17th, after this harvest or transition or whatever it is? Do I go? Do I stay? How do I know if I'm ready? Aerith turned those large eyes on him, and Marcus felt a wave of something like affection through the telepathic link. You are already ready, Marcus. You have been preparing your whole life, though you did not know it. Every surgery you performed was practice in holding consciousness steady during crisis. Every patient you saved was lesson in compassion. Even your breakdown, your exile, your dark night of the soul, this was necessary stripping away of false identity so you could discover true self. You think you are broken. I see you whole. When the frequency activates, you will feel it as coming home. Your body will transform painlessly, joyfully. You will be able to still interact with third density if you choose, to help those transitioning, but you will perceive and inhabit fourth density primarily. You will have abilities you call miraculous, but which are simply natural expressions of consciousness liberated from limiting beliefs. You will heal by touch and intention. You will communicate telepathically. You will manifest what you need. You will age differently, live longer. You will remember all your lifetimes, understand your purpose fully. And most beautifully, you will reunite with those you love who have already transitioned, your wife. And here, Aerith shared an image that took Marcus's breath away. Sarah, not as she'd been at the end, but radiant, whole, young and laughing, waiting in that adjacent density Marcus was moving toward. She never left you. She has been with you always, guiding, loving, preparing for the reunion she knows is coming. Marcus wept then openly, all the grief of 5 years pouring out into the desert silence, and Aerith sat beside him, one long hand resting gently on his shoulder, providing comfort without words, presence without judgment. On the 4th day, as dawn broke crimson and magnificent over the desert, Aerith's vessel was repaired. The being had been working on it each night with tools Marcus couldn't comprehend, the craft healing itself under Aerith's direction as mysteriously as the being's body had healed. They stood together beside it, this impossible object that had crashed into Marcus's life and shattered his reality, and said their goodbyes. You will not see me again in this lifetime, Aerith projected, but you will feel my presence, and the presence of countless others like me, watching, supporting, celebrating, as you and your species take this leap. We are so proud of you. Despite everything, the manipulation, the forgetting, the suffering, you have chosen love. Enough of you have chosen love. That is all that was ever needed. What do I do now? Marcus asked, feeling suddenly small and uncertain, a child watching his teacher depart. Live, heal, share what you have learned with those who ask, not by proselytizing or forcing, but by being example. Your life will become the sermon. People will sense something different about you, and the ones ready to hear will find you. Trust this. Trust yourself. Trust the process that has already begun. And prepare. December 17th is coming fast. On that night, go somewhere you feel safe, somewhere open to sky. Surround yourself with those you love if possible, or stand alone if that is your path. When the frequency activates, open yourself to it. Do not resist from fear. Let go, let yourself transform. And on the other side, when you are standing in the new world with new eyes, Remember me, remember this conversation, and help others who are frightened, who do not understand what is happening to them." The craft hummed to life, that harmonic vibration Marcus had heard the night of the crash, and Aerith climbed inside through an opening that appeared seamlessly in the hull. For a moment, those large eyes met Marcus's one final time, and through the telepathic link came a final transmission. "You were never broken, Marcus. You were always exactly what you needed to be, and you are loved beyond measure by more beings than you can imagine. Never forget this." Then the opening sealed. The craft rose silently into the morning sky, accelerated to impossible speed, and vanished into the blue. Marcus stood alone in his desert, watching the empty sky, tears on his cheeks and a certainty in his heart that felt like coming home after a lifetime of wandering. Above him, contrails from a distant airplane caught the light, and for a moment they looked almost like wings. The remaining weeks passed in a blur of preparation. Marcus didn't fully understand, but trusted implicitly. He found himself drawn to meditation, sitting for hours in the desert, feeling consciousness expand beyond the boundaries of his skull, sensing the interconnected web of life that Aerith had described. His hands began to warm when he focused intention through them, and when old Miguel from the neighboring ranch came by with a gashed arm from barbed wire, Marcus laid hands on the wound and felt energy flow through him, watched the flesh knit faster than it should, Miguel's eyes going wide with wonder and something like recognition. Word spread quietly through the desert communities. The hermit doctor had changed somehow, had a healing touch, spoke words that resonated with something deep and half-remembered in the soul. People began appearing at his door, a woman whose chronic pain disappeared under his hands, a man whose depression lifted after a single conversation, a child whose cancer went into spontaneous remission after Marcus sat with her for an afternoon. He accepted no payment, asked nothing in return except that they consider the possibility that they too carried this healing power, this divine spark, merely dormant and waiting for awakening. He called his daughter, Emma, in Seattle, and spoke to her with an openness and vulnerability he'd never managed before. Told her he loved her, that he was sorry for his absence during her childhood, his prioritization of career over family. Told her that her mother was okay, more than okay, waiting in a place of light and love. Told her strange truths about the universe and human destiny that should have sounded crazy, but somehow didn't, not coming from him with this new certainty in his voice. She listened, was quiet for a long time, then said, "Dad, I've been having dreams. About light, about changing, about," and her voice broke, "about Mom, telling me it's almost time." "It is," Marcus said gently. "December 17th. Can you come here, be with me when it happens?" "Yes," she said without hesitation. "Yes, I'll be there." On December 16th, Emma arrived, driving the 1,000 miles from Seattle, and Marcus gathered her into his arms, feeling the love between them as tangible force, seeing with his expanded awareness the golden threads connecting their hearts, father and daughter, two souls who had chosen each other for this lifetime, for this learning, for this transition. They spent the day in quiet preparation, cooking together, walking the desert, talking about everything and nothing, just being present with each other in a way they never had before. That night, as the stars emerged in their countless billions and the comet blazed visible even through light pollution, a bright smudge in the northwestern sky, they drove to the rock outcropping where Marcus had sat with Aerith. They weren't alone. Others had come, people Marcus had helped, people who'd heard whispers of the hermit doctor's strange knowledge and felt called to be present. 20 souls in all, gathered in a circle, holding hands, facing the sky, waiting for whatever came. At 9:47 p.m. it happened. A pulse, silent but felt, rippled through the fabric of reality. Marcus gasped, feeling his consciousness suddenly expand beyond all previous limits, beyond his body, beyond the planet, out into the cosmos, and then back, collapsing into his heart, where it encountered something vast and loving and infinitely patient that he recognized as his own divine nature, his true self, the God spark that had always been there, obscured by forgetting but never destroyed. Around the circle, others were experiencing their own version, some weeping, some laughing, some standing in silent awe as the veil lifted and they saw clearly for the first time. The frequency wasn't painful, it was ecstatic, like every cell in the body singing in harmony, like consciousness tuning to a station it had been searching for without knowing what it sought. Marcus felt his body shifting, not visibly to the naked eye, but on some fundamental level, the dense carbon structure becoming more crystalline, more light-based, more able to hold and transmit the higher frequencies now flooding the planet. And then he saw her, Sarah, not in vision, but in actual presence, standing in the circle with them, visible, solid, real. She was radiant, glowing with inner light, exactly as Aerith had shown her. And when their eyes met across the space, she smiled with such joy that Marcus felt his heart might burst. Emma saw her too. Marcus knew because he heard his daughter's sharp intake of breath, felt her hand tighten in his, and Sarah's attention turned to their daughter, love pouring from her like light, like music, like everything beautiful and true that words could never capture. "Welcome home," Sarah said, not aloud but mind to mind, and Marcus understood that this was it. This was the rapture. This was the harvest. This was humanity being born into its true nature after millennia of forgetting. Not everyone was experiencing it. In towns and cities, the unprepared were panicking, overwhelmed by energies they couldn't understand, reality shifting in ways their rigid beliefs couldn't accommodate. But here, in this desert circle, among the humble and the seeking and the open-hearted, transformation was unfolding as naturally as breathing. The moment stretched into eternity and collapsed into an instant, and when it passed, or rather, when they adjusted to the new baseline frequency, they were changed. They looked at each other with new eyes that saw beyond flesh to soul, that recognized the divine in each face. They felt the connections binding them not just to each other, but to all life.